Today we're making cinnamon raisin yeast bread in our trusty bread machine. It's so easy and so delicious, you're going to be wanting to make it on a regular basis to have on hand for breakfast or even as a tasty snack. If you've seen many of my other bread machine videos, you know that I like to use the dough cycle when I'm making my bread. I really do prefer to just use the machine to do the mixing, the kneading, and the rising of the dough. I like to transfer it to a loaf pan and bake it in my oven. But today, we're going to use the bread machine to do all of the work. And as we go along, I'll share some of my tips for perfect bread machine bread every time. Let's start by talking about the ingredients. The loaf that I'm making today is a 1.5 pound loaf of cinnamon raisin bread. And for that, I'm going to be using 3 cups of bread flour that I measured carefully so that it would weigh 360 grams, so that I know that I'm starting with a good amount of flour to begin this process. For this bread, I'm also using light brown sugar. I wanted to add a little bit of color to the bread in its final stage. I'm also using raisins, but the raisins are going to be the very last thing to go into the bread, and that will be prompted by a beeping sound on my machine. I'm using the cycle, that sweet bread cycle, that will give me the right timing for adding the raisins. Another thing to note is that cinnamon can react with the yeast. So what I'm going to do is take my 1 teaspoon of cinnamon and mix it with my brown sugar to make sure that it is well distributed amongst the sugar, and that when it gets kneaded into the dough, there won't be any pockets of cinnamon hidden in the dough. You want to make sure that your paddle is freely moving inside your pan, and then add your ingredients. I'm starting with 1 cup of baby bottle warm water, 2 tablespoons of soft butter, my 2 tablespoons of brown sugar with 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1.5 teaspoons of table salt, 3 cups of flour approximately. It's 360 grams of bread flour. And I'm just going to distribute that evenly and sprinkle 2 teaspoons of bread machine yeast on top of the flour. Place the pan into the bread machine, secure it, close the cover, and then for this recipe, I need to choose the cycle, the loaf size, and the crust I desire. I'm choosing the sweet bread cycle, a medium crust, and a 1.5 pound loaf. And start. The sweet cycle on my machine has 2 kneading sessions. The first one is 10 minutes with a 5-minute rest, and then it goes on to another 20-minute kneading session. Between the 2 kneading sessions is when it beeps to tell me to add the raisins. That's also the time I want to check to make sure the dough is the right consistency, and to check whether I need to add any water or any additional flour to get it to be what I want it to be. So I give it a poke, and if it has a good response, my finger doesn't stick to it, I can see that it's cleaning off the sides of the pan really well, my dough is good. So I'm adding the raisins now. One additional thing to note is that at the end of the second kneading session, before it goes into its rise and then bake, I'm going to reach into the pan and fish out the paddle, so I don't have a paddle embedded in my final loaf. The bread has baked and cooled on a wired rack, and now it's time to cut into it and take a look at what we have. And there you can see a beautiful slice of cinnamon raisin bread made in the bread machine. Let's try a piece of toasted, oh, listen to the crunch, cinnamon raisin bread. These are nice large pieces. How about that? You're gonna love it.